All right, well, let's get into it. The Raiders have absolutely cleaned house. Dave Ziegler, the general manager, and Josh McDaniels, head coach, are out.
Or if you want to look at it in a positive light, they've promoted several people overnight. Antonio Pierce fired up the ziggurat right to the top.
Champ Kelly. Champ Kelly's the interim GM over there. So you're right. Let's reposition that. Raiders promote from within.
Yeah, just making moves.
Look at that.
Overnight. Everyone else is sleeping, apparently.
Raiders adding jobs.
Yeah, and the Raiders are just promoting people right up the ladder.
What was your initial take on this? You've had some strong Josh McDaniels takes anyway, that he's not good.
Yeah.
The evidence is mounting that might be true. This might be the end of the Josh McDaniels head coaching era.
No. He's young enough that he can do a whole new cycle of going back to New England, being offensive coordinator for 8 years again, and then getting hired as a head coach again. Ideally in an AFC West team, so we can go through the entire division and then bomb the entire process again. Like, we've got time for another whole cycle.
Yeah, I don't think Tom Brady's not there anymore. It might not happen this time around.
I mean, that is a challenge now, but the man's only 47 years old. He's got time.
Bill Barnwell of ESPN, because he did the research, I want to give him some credit. He says he couldn't find any coach that was fired mid-season twice.
I mean, there's a good argument to be made that he is two of the worst head coaching hires in the last 25 years or whatever.
Yeah. Barnwell does a pretty good job breaking down the Raiders' transgressions from his perspective, but also reliving the 2009-2010 Denver Broncos, which included McDaniels moving on from Jay Cutler,
phenomenal, getting
first-round picks, spending the first-round picks on Tim Tebow, starting 6-0 in his career, and then not winning too many games after that.
Yeah. According to Ari, his career as a Broncos head coach lasted longer than his career as a Raiders head coach, 694 days versus 639. What the thing that really stands out...
As of 7 seconds ago, the Yahoo Sports says, per Burt Breer, the Raiders have also fired offensive coordinator Mick Lombardi.
So...
Mike Lombardi's son?
Yes. No, I understand that.
No comment other than Mike Lombardi takes some idiot shots at PFF every now and then. That's all.
Okay.
Mike says some stupid things.
Mike does say some stupid things. Always has done, in fact.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of makes sense. I was thinking about that. We have an email that we'll get to at some point talking about Josh McDaniels, Jimmy G, the Raiders, et cetera. And I was kind of looking through some of their tape. And I was kind of wondering, like, okay, you just fired the guy whose offense it is. Like, what are you running at the moment, right? Because you can't, I mean, are you going to start from scratch with a new offense? But the guy previous, the assistants are still there. I was confused as to what they're doing. Now they fired the assistants as well. It's the same question, albeit with a different dynamic.
I mean, mid-season, you're not like, all right, we're going from, Earhart-Perkins system to West Coast. We're going to change the terminology. It's going to be the same terminology, different play caller.
Right, but you have fired, like, the architects of the offense.
Yeah.
All of them at this point. So that does make things different. Like, my initial reaction, the thing that jumps out to me when you look back and now review Raiders McDaniels and Denver McDaniels is the similarity between the two are insane. Like, it genuinely looks... How long was he back in New England after the Broncos mess? Like a decade?
10 years.
Yeah.
He got back there officially in 2012. It was 2012 through 21.
Right. So he went back for a decade and appears to have learned nothing as a head coach. Like, your initial reaction is, okay, the Broncos thing went bad. He was young. He was only mid-30s. Like, this was it was just too soon. Too much too soon. He did an absolute train wreck of a job there. He drove this franchise off a cliff in 2 years and got fired. Now he went back to New England. He went back to his old job. He learned his lessons. This time it will be different. What's genuinely amazing is that this time was like a carbon copy replica of what he did the last time, right? Down to, okay, you have a quarterback that might not be great, but is pretty good and is, good enough. And you decide you want to move in a different direction, right? So they did that with Jay Cutler the first time in Denver, did it again with Derek Carr and the Raiders. We're going to sit him for the final couple of weeks lest he get injured and we get on the hook for his contract. We are unceremoniously dumping the franchise quarterback. Okay. And in both instances, it was a defendable decision, right? Jay Cutler, it's like, the rest of Jay Cutler's career is why they wanted to move on from Jay Cutler. As talented as he was never going to be the guy. Derek Carr, we've been through that before as well. So it's an entirely defendable thing to happen. But in the case of Jay Cutler, your answer was Tim Tebow, right? I mean, your defendable decision got made look dumb by the fact that your solution to that was even worse. And now with the Raiders, your solution has been Jimmy G, which is worse. So again, you've made a defendable decision and then made it look stupid by your solution to the new quarterback. Then you get the offense, you're sort of part of this thing schematically, is not working. The personality thing seems to be a problem. Yesterday, the comments after Monday Night Football, when you have Josh Jacobs basically saying, I don't know how you fix the offense. It's not my job. Devontae Adams being pissed off. The kind of comments coming out of that locker room are of the type of, we have frustrations directed at a certain person, but, we can't make too much of a noise about it because we know what that does. So it's sort of sounding like he's losing the locker room as well, the way he lost it in Denver. I'm just so staggered how much of a complete replica this was of the last time he made an absolute balls of the job.
Some of the other moves that the Raiders made, remember, before they cut Derek Carr, or before they traded Derek Carr, or cut him. They had to cut him, right? Yeah, he was a free agent, sorry.
Yeah.
They re-signed him to a big deal. They gave him a ton of money. They gave Chandler Jones a ton of money. The Devontae Adams move, was it the wrong one? Maybe in the timing of the Raiders organization. Remember when Dave Ziegler comes in with McDaniels, they were a playoff team. Okay, they were a real playoff team, but it was they overachieved, right? They were in the middle of a rebuild, should have been in the middle of a rebuild, while the Chiefs and the Chargers are clearly better than them, or at least they should have been. And then they go and get Devontae Adams, which, go get the number one wide receiver. I'm all about that, but it's just a weird transitional time for the Raiders to be doing that.
They went and got Devontae Adams, which in itself is, a big move, but also part of the selling point is you pair Devontae Adams with his old college quarterback, Derek Carr, and when they arrived in Vegas, they were talking up Derek Carr as, we believe in Derek Carr. We think he's the guy. Now, either that was a lie all the way along, in which case giving him the contract extension was dumb, and frankly saying it out loud was also dumb. There's different ways to sort of make that point without committing yourself to him when you're planning on getting rid of him. Or in the space of 2/3 of a season, they decided, we got this completely wrong and we misevaluated the guy from the outside right away, which is a pretty big red flag for your ability to do the job competently. And then you made that worse by bringing in Devontae Adams to work with him, then dumping him out of the building. And then you got, the whole thing has just been a mess. I forget where I snipped this from. It was one of those, a news aggregation app on my phone, and I just screenshotted it, so I don't know what article it's from. But this is a little summation of Josh McDaniels' resume as a Raiders head coach. The Raiders suffered some of the most embarrassing defeats in franchise history under the McDaniels-Ziegler duo. That included blowing a 20-0 halftime lead against Arizona for the biggest collapse in franchise history, losing to Indianapolis in the Colts' first game with Jeff Saturday as an interim head coach after he'd never coached above the high school level, blowing a double-digit lead to Baker Mayfield and the Rams 2 days after Mayfield joined his new team, and getting shut out in New Orleans when the starting offense failed to cross the 50-yard line, and losing to Tyson Bagent, a Division II quarterback making his first start in the NFL. It hasn't just been losses. It's been some of the most embarrassing losses that any team has suffered in the last, X number of years in the NFL.
Yeah, it's been a rough couple of years. And even then, I feel like the Raiders have kind of played a little above my expectation this year.
Yeah,
because they got whooped by the Bills, but they played tougher in a few games.
McDaniels was my front runner, my bingo card for first head coach fired. I got it, nailed it.
What do you win?
I don't know. Kudos.
Oh, kudos.
Respect
then.
from my fellow man.
Kudos then, Sam. I mean, they were 3-3 a couple weeks ago. Now their wins are against the Broncos, the Packers, and the Patriots. Mm-hmm. Combined 7 wins across those 3 teams. But at the time, we didn't know what the Broncos exactly would be. We thought the Packers were a little bit better a few weeks ago. New England was beat down and pretty bad at the time when they beat them. But coming off 2 rough losses against the Bears and then the Monday night game against the Lions. Yeah, the Belichick tree continues to not look great. I mean, the most success people coming from the Belichick tree, is it Bill O'Brien?
Yeah, it
By
is.
far, right?
Right.
You have Eric Mangini had a little run with the Jets. Romeo Crennel had a little run, and it might be like a year, like 2007 with the Browns. Charlie Weiss had a year at Notre Dame. Like, so this is the thing, right? All of these coaches that the early Belichick tree that left had one big year or so where they either made the playoffs or, Charlie Weiss made a little run with Brady Quinn as his QB. Bill O'Brien's the only one who had decent success as a head coach, but as soon as he was handed the keys to general manager, it all fell apart.
Right.
And then you have Matt Patricia.
I mean, Flores, I guess, did okay for a while.
I was going to say Flores had pretty much one good year too, where he was really, like, his team was really bad. He started like 1-7 or whatever, and then went on a run.
You would look at them, though, like in the totality of their resumes post New England, you wouldn't call any of them a success.
No, because they all pretty much all got fired within 3 years,
so
except O'Brien.
You've got that side of things, and then you have now the history of the people that Mark Davis has hired since being in charge of the Raiders. So Al Davis died in, 2011. Since then, I believe Mark Davis has hired 7 head coaches, 2 of them interim, 8, I guess, now with Antonio Pierce stepping up to be interim. So 8 head coaches, 5 of them real and 3 of them interim guys, and then 3 general managers. Did he hire Reggie, or was Reggie already there? Anyway, 3 general managers have been there during his time. And when you look at the list of those guys, it's not good. Hugh Jackson lasted 16 games before they got rid of him. Tony Sperano was the interim guy. Then it was Dennis Allen, Jack Del Rio, John Gruden, and then blew up in scandal. Rich Bisaccia was the interim guy there. Then the Josh McDaniels thing, and now it's going to be Antonio Pierce as the interim guy. And then general manager Reggie McKenzie, the Mike Mayock experiment, and then Dave Ziegler. And what I think stands out to me the most about that list is, obviously in hindsight, it looks terrible, right? But even sort of putting yourself in the position of the time, only one of those hires, I think, made sense. Like Dennis Allen is the only guy who at the time, I think, would have been top tier candidate for a head coaching job. Like
you laugh at the Gruden thing just because he was in the booth for 10 years.
Yes.
Or 8 years, whatever it was. It's not crazy. The Gruden wasn't crazy.
They hired Gruden out of an announcing booth after a decade on the sidelines. It gave him a 10-year, $100 million contract.
Okay, yeah, the mechanics of that was definitely
obviously you couldn't have anticipated the email mess and the fact that he would have to, like, the scandal, right? But it wasn't going well anyway. It's not like Gruden had sort of, justified roll back the years, and we were like, it was this. That felt like, okay, everything I've done so far has been a train wreck. What's the last successful thing I can remember this franchise doing? Give me that guy. It would be like, it was like we wwere joking about.
Be like grabbing Jeff Saturday.
Exactly. It was exactly like that, right? It was a higher profile version of that in that, at least he had a career as a successful head coach.
But the interesting thing on that list, and maybe I'll admit something I'm wrong about. A lot of people wanted Rich Bisaccia to be the head coach because in 2021, they were 3-3, 3-4. Gruden gets fired. Bisaccia takes over.
Yeah.
He was the special teams coach. He becomes interim head coach, and they make the playoffs, winning their last 4, including that ridiculous last week of the year game with the Chargers. And a lot of people are like, well, Rich Bisaccia, he's the guy. He turned it around. Mm-hmm. You had a similar discussion last year with the Carolina Panthers where Steve Wilkes took over.
Yep.
He was interim coach. I am usually the one, even in college, this happened with Ed Orgeron years ago. Like, he was a good interim coach at USC. And I'm always the one who's like, I don't care if you're a good interim coach. I don't think it matters to project what you're going to do for an entire offseason and everything. But in this case, who the Raiders chose, we'll see what happens with the Panthers. Maybe they should have gone the interim route. Give Bisaccia a chance. Give Steve Wilkes a chance in Carolina. I don't really think, like, if you get the team to play well for 8, 10, 12 weeks, it means a whole lot in the grand scheme of things. At the same time, maybe it does.
Well, I think because head coach is such a unique position where like how much of the job is actually it's all the stuff Josh McDaniels is apparently horrific at, like man management, motivating your players, all this kind of stuff, right? Sure, like it depends on the type of head coach you are. Obviously, if you're Kyle Shanahan, your X's and O's ability is actually a pretty important part of the job, right? It's less so if you're the sort of administrating head coach where your offensive coordinator and your defensive coordinator do the heavy lifting from a schematic point of view, and you're more of a let's get this on the right track. Let's make sure the organization is running well. Let's make sure everybody's pumped and ready to go. Like, if you're going to be that style of head coach, maybe the best thing you can have on your resume is actually like the last 8 games of showing you can do that, right? Like maybe the best piece of evidence Steve Wilkes or Rich Bisaccia could have is literally showing they can do the job with the team that you're about to give them. Like, it's not like they did it somewhere else and you're going to hire them based off that. Like, they're doing it with this group of players.
With a team that was previously not good.
Terrible,
yeah.
Right. So you've shown immediately that they can have an impact with the guys you want to turn the keys over to. Maybe that is, in fact, exactly what you want. Now, if you're planning on hiring one of those guys, like one of the biggest questions in that interview process would presumably be, hey, who are you planning on hiring? Like, who are your coordinators, right? I think you show me you can motivate players, you can get the most out of this group, but you were, a special teams coordinator or you were whatever. Like, who are your coaches going to be? I need to know that part of it before I'm willing to make this leap. But I'm willing to entertain the idea that that's actually a pretty strong line on the resume for those guys, and maybe those guys should get more of an opportunity. Like, if Antonio Pierce comes in, rights this ship, and the Raiders look respectable and good for the rest of the year, I'd say that's actually a pretty strong case that he can run an NFL franchise. And if Antonio Pierce has enough connections that he can go, hey, I'm going to bring in these 2 strong coordinators, this is who we're going to go with next year, why not give him the job?
Something to keep an eye on with the Raiders. But, everything was bad on offense with the Raiders. And I don't think it should have been. They don't have a terrible offensive line. You have Devontae Adams, who still looks good. Is he the same guy he was 3 years ago? Maybe you could argue he's not. But
right.
But is that only because he doesn't have the same production? He was still really productive last year with Derek Carr. Jacoby Myers is a really good 2. You have good playmakers. I can't figure out. Josh Jacobs is averaging 3 yards a pop, and I don't think the line's bad, and I don't know if Jacobs is bad. I don't know. Something's bad there, though.
Yeah, and you've got Hunter Renfrow caught 100 passes last year, and now can't even get a target.
The pieces should be there. And again,
we had an email come in from Austin Putz, longtime listener to the show, regularly frequent emailer as well. Hi, Sam and Steve. I've been thinking about Jimmy Garoppolo since last night's performance. So this came in late yesterday. I don't think today you guys compared him enough to what he did during his time with the 49ers and Shanahan. I know we all know that Shanahan is a great offense coordinator, but it hasn't specifically come up that I can recall with the 49ers that Jimmy G was at least serviceable in fantasy and as a game manager for the team and winning several playoff games. This is a good case study for how good Shanahan is and how terrible McDaniels is. One question I have is what McDaniels is doing wrong, and how is he good with Bill Belichick in New England? I don't remember the specifics from today's episode and how exactly he falls apart as a coach, aside from game managing that Sam mentioned. Thanks, Austin. So, we've done the Josh McDaniels thing a little bit, but when you started going through the tape and you're looking at what that scheme is doing, it's falling into this category of offenses that is not helping out players. There doesn't appear to be an awful lot of joined up thinking within the offense. The actual plays they're running don't seem to flow together or connect in any way, even within the individual plays. They're not necessarily scheming individuals open or opening things up for specific receivers. The first interception that Jimmy G threw was just this nothing double move against cover 2. It was a bad decision, but it was also a bad play. There was nothing there. And a bunch of the plays in that Lions games, you're watching them and you're like, this is drawing up nothing. These are not, there's no interplay with these route combinations. They're not the sort of established concepts that you're familiar with. They're just routes to nowhere. It's not it's at the other end of the spectrum from like the Mike McDaniel, Kyle Shanahan type of offense, where you can see very specifically what is happening, who they're trying to get open, how they're working it. There were a couple of plays in there where you could see that. I mean, ironically, they very well schemed Devontae Adams one-on-one, a slant route against a linebacker, I think, and then the ball gets batted down the line. It's like, I mean, that was an easy first down and should have been there and was there, and then guy bats it at the line. You're like, okay, that's just getting unlucky.
That's bad luck.
Right.
Yeah.
But most of the plays were not of that that category.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're going to, like, again, the Josh McDaniels history here. He took over as New England offensive coordinator in probably like 06. I think it was after Charlie Weiss left. He didn't really get the title. 07, one of the most prolific offenses in NFL history with Brady, Moss, Welker. When McDaniels left, he goes to Denver, which you mentioned. He also went to the Rams for a couple of years. He didn't go directly back to New England. He went back to New England after that. So he didn't have offensive success in Denver or with the Rams in St. Louis. Goes back to New England, has offensive success, has Brady the entire time, has Mac Jones. He has Cam Newton in 2020 and Mac Jones in 21. And the first half of Mac Jones' career was solid. But honestly, if you look back, and then last year with the Raiders, McDaniels has like a half a season of good offense in a non-Tom Brady world. That's what he has in his career. Across Denver, St. Louis Rams, New England for 2 years without Brady, and then with the Raiders. That's it. And even like last year's Raiders offense was fine. It was solid. But it definitely felt like it could have been a lot better when you have Derek Carr and you have Devontae Adams and Josh Jacobs running the way he did last year. So that's a...
And when he went back to New England after the whole mess the first time, it didn't... This wasn't like New England now where it's like, God, we desperately need somebody to come in and fix the offense. It was kind of like, yeah, we can bring him in and Tom Brady's familiar with him and likes him. But there was sort of this... There was a general feeling that Brady's basically running his own offense.
Oh, yeah. They went from, it was 2011 to 12 was the transition. They went from Bill O'Brien. Bill O'Brien went and got the Penn State job.
Right.
Josh McDaniels comes in, and they just pick up
right
where
and
they
it was
left
sort of
off.
like, just don't rock the boat and, you know, ruin Brady. Like, Brady's got this covered. He doesn't really need an offensive coordinator. He just needs somebody he can get on with. And, you know, and it was like, and then as the years wore on, right, it's like, no, let's give McDaniels a bigger and bigger piece of the credit. And it's always, I think this comes from, like, announcers, right? Like guys that talk to the production meetings, right? We sit down, we talk to Josh McDaniels and like, let me tell you everything he said and yada, yada, right? Like that's...
Tom loves Josh.
Right. Like that's what changes perception. But if you were just left from the outside looking in, you'd be with the same opinion, which is like Tom Brady's got this covered. All you need is to just not mess it up.
That was like what I said about Bill Belichick making personnel moves that like worked a decade ago because you have this fail-safe in Brady.
Yeah.
You know, did McDaniels run into that too? I know offense. I'm going to do it the way we did with Tom Brady. And you know Tom Brady's great. You know Tom Brady's better than Derek Carr. You know he's better than Jimmy Garoppolo, but you don't really feel it until you're in it, right? And it's like, oh no, I have to do more work, basically. But it goes back to the Shanahan thing as well, and why we, why downplay the using just EPA as a stat for quarterbacks or yards per attempt or passer rating, because those are so team driven. And you saw Jimmy Garoppolo with ridiculous stats with the 49ers. I also think Garoppolo, every time you watched his games, you're like, oh man, just a head scratching decision from Jimmy Garoppolo again. But then you'd go back and say, well, Kyle Shanahan, when he had Jimmy Garoppolo, always made it to the NFC Championship or beyond. And he won way more games than he did with the backups until Brock Purdy showed up. So it's like, all right, maybe Garoppolo for this offense, for Shanahan, is good. Is he leaving something on the table? Sure. But he's good. Like he did a lot of good things. But I think it elevates Shanahan again even further to see the A/B analysis of Garoppolo in San Francisco versus in Las Vegas.
It definitely does. I mean, I think you see two ends of the spectrum in terms of an offense. It's elevating people, in particular its quarterbacks, and an offense that is actually harming people, including its quarterbacks. But we talked about this on the show yesterday. Like, we talk all the time about when multiple areas are grading well and the production associated with those areas is bad. That's usually the difference. I think the majority of that difference can usually be ascribed to coaching, right? The scheme. That's where you bridge that gap. And a lot of the times it works in the opposite direction, right? When guys aren't grading particularly well, but the results are insane, it's like, your system's broken. No, what's happening is the scheme is creating something greater than the sum of the parts of the individuals. But I think what you're seeing with the Raiders is the exact opposite happening, which is nobody's grading terribly on offense generally, and yet the whole thing is a mess, which means the scheme is broken. Like, that's what's happening. And you turn on the tape and you see the same thing. I don't think Jimmy G is playing as bad as his stats look.
Yeah.
But he's probably playing worse than he did in San Francisco. I think he's been injured a lot in his NFL career. I think that's probably taken something from him. But it's those two things put together. Like, you're getting a slightly diminished version of Jimmy G, and you've taken him away from, like, the best system in the NFL for making him look good and plugged him into one of the worst.
Yeah, I also wonder how much the McDaniels, it's the Earhart-Perkins system, which is completely, it's like polar opposite of the West Coast system.
It's like the one system in the NFL that doesn't bear resemblance to any other system.
Yeah, I mean, you'll get some plays that are called differently, but they look the same. Like, they'll still run mesh, right? Everybody runs mesh, but it is it's different terminology. It's different ways of how you look at things pre-snap, post-snap. Whereas Shanahan in particular, and his whole tree, the whole Shanahan tree, is like, man, just do what I say, go from here to here to here, and throw it, right, and get rid of it. Where I think there's a little bit more thinking in McDaniels' offense, which again, Derek Carr was in old school West Coast offense with John Gruden, and then goes to McDaniels, and something's different. Garoppolo's in old school West Coast offense with Shanahan, basically, and then goes to McDaniels. And so how do you, like, Josh McDaniels teaching something from scratch, even though Garoppolo was in it before in New England, he'd had most of his success in San Francisco. So, man, there's a lot to discuss with all of this. But Raiders are 3-5, and we got a new crew, and Walt wants Jim Harbaugh. In 2000.
I thought we were going to have to send a wellness check on Walt. He hadn't been in the chat.
He's all right. He's ready to go. He knows.
But so, Mark Davis has sort of said we're an exhaustive process, search, yada, yada. Like, who's running this search? I mean, we highlighted the hires he's made so far in his career as running this thing. It's not been good.
Maybe it's time for a consultant GM.
Yes. Mark, if you're listening, now, consultant GM, consultant billionaire. Number one, get rid of that haircut. First thing. First thing's got to go. Number two, you need consultant Palazzolo here to hire your new general manager and your new head coach. Between us, we can get this thing done.